Congratulations. Out of every woman in the ancient world, you've been selected, chosen from thousands, handpicked by the most powerful king on earth. You're about to become a queen, a wife of Solomon himself, son of David, ruler of Israel, the man scripture calls the wisest who ever lived. Sounds like winning the ancient world lottery. It is not. And by the time this is over, you're going to understand why the worst number in the Bible isn't 666. It's 700. Specifically the 700th. Specifically you. Let's go back to the beginning. You're born somewhere in a foreign kingdom, and unlike most children, the exact location depends entirely on your father's political ambitions, because that's the only reason you're here. You're not here because Solomon loves you, and you're definitely not here because fate brought two souls together across the ancient world. You're here because your father is a king, a noble, or a regional governor who wants an alliance with Israel, and a royal marriage is cheaper than a war. You are a transaction. A very expensive, well-dressed transaction, but a transaction nonetheless. Your mother knows it. Your father knows it. The servants packing your dowry know it. You're the last one to figure it out. Growing up, you're told you're special, destined for greatness. The palace in Jerusalem is magnificent. Solomon is wise beyond measure, and your life is going to be extraordinary. And technically, none of that is a lie. The palace really is magnificent. Solomon really is extraordinarily wise. Your life is going to be many things. Extraordinary is one of them. Comfortable is not. The journey to Jerusalem takes weeks, and your entire world fits into the caravan behind you. Your nurses, your attendants, your personal belongings, the cooking styles you grew up with, the language your mother sang to you, the gods your people prayed to before bed. You bring all of it because you're told you can keep your customs. Solomon is famously tolerant of foreign religions. What nobody mentions is why. Not out of respect, not out of wisdom, but out of volume. When you have 700 wives from 700 different places, you simply cannot enforce a single religion without starting 700 separate domestic arguments simultaneously. Even Solomon doesn't have the energy for that. You arrive in Jerusalem expecting greatness. The city exceeds every expectation. The temple alone is enough to leave you speechless. Gold gleams from every direction. Cedar imported from Lebanon perfumes the air. Everywhere you look, wealth and craftsmanship announce the same message. This kingdom is powerful. This kingdom is stable. This kingdom will last forever. Or so everyone believes. Then they show you your quarters. They're comfortable, clean, well-furnished. Then you ask the question nobody prepared you for. When do I meet Solomon? The attendant pauses, just for a second, but it's enough. Solomon has a schedule. The schedule is managed by palace administrators. Wives are assigned visitation rotations. You are wife number 700. The math is not in your favor. Weeks pass, then months. You meet the other wives. Egyptians, Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, Edomites, women from kingdoms scattered across the known world. They're beautiful, they're educated, they're influential, and they're bored. Painfully bored. The Egyptian wives have been here longest. They occupy the best quarters and guard their status like dragons sitting on treasure. The newer wives cluster together in small social circles based on language and homeland. Everyone smiles. Nobody trusts anyone. Because friendship requires honesty, and honesty requires admitting something nobody wants to say aloud. Most of these women hate being here. Not because Jerusalem is unpleasant, because they're trapped. The palace isn't a home, it's a waiting room, and everyone is waiting for the same person, Solomon. You learn quickly that information moves faster than disease. One careless remark about food becomes a political insult. One joke becomes gossip. One complaint becomes a rumor. The walls have ears. The servants have ears. The wives have ears. Soon you learn to measure every word. Months become years. The routine never changes. Wake, eat, attend ceremonies, socialize, sleep, repeat. The days blur together until entire seasons disappear. This is not what you imagined marriage would be. Then, nearly a year after arriving, your turn finally comes. You meet Solomon, and immediately understand why history remembers him. He's brilliant. Not in the way people usually mean. Not clever, not intelligent. Brilliant.
The kind of person who can discuss astronomy, law, architecture, theology, agriculture, economics, and philosophy in a single conversation without losing his train of thought. He asks where you're from. You tell him. To your surprise, he knows your homeland better than some people who live there. Its trade routes, its harvest cycles, its rivers, its politics. For a while, you forget you're talking to a king. Then a servant enters. Another crisis, another meeting, another responsibility. Solomon apologizes, stands, leaves, just like that. And you realize the tragedy of being married to the wisest man alive. Everyone wants a piece of him. Eventually, there isn't enough left for anyone. The next morning, he's gone. The next rotation is 14 months away. 14 months. You do the arithmetic. Even if Solomon spent one night with every wife, it would take years to complete a cycle. And everyone knows some wives receive more attention than others. You are not the favorite. You are the footnote. Then, one day, everything changes. Workers begin carrying stone idols through the palace grounds. At first, nobody thinks much of it. The palace is always building something. Then you recognize the symbols. Chemosh, Molech, foreign gods, foreign shrines, foreign altars inside Israel. You ask an attendant what's happening. The king approved them. The king approved them. That should be impossible. The entire kingdom is built around the worship of one God. Yet somehow, more shrines appear every year. One becomes 3, 3 become 10, 10 become dozens, each one built to accommodate another wife, another culture, another homeland. At first, it feels harmless, a political compromise, a gesture of kindness. Then the whispers begin. The priests are worried. The nobles are worried. Even palace officials seem uneasy. For the first time, you hear people criticize Solomon openly, not enemies, his own people. And suddenly, you realize something. The kingdom isn't growing stronger anymore. It's stretching. And stretched things eventually break. Years pass. More wives arrive. More shrines appear. More compromises get made. Nobody notices the change while it's happening. That's how big changes work. Not all at once. One small decision at a time. One exception. One accommodation. One harmless compromise. Until one day, the world looks completely different. The priests no longer look at Solomon with admiration. They look at him with grief. The wisest man who ever lived is slowly losing control of the thing he spent decades building. Not because he lacks intelligence, because nobody is smart enough to manage 700 competing worlds forever. You understand that better than anyone. You live among those worlds. You are one of those worlds. Eventually, age catches everyone, including Solomon. The king, who once seemed larger than life, begins moving more slowly. His hair grays, his shoulders sag. The energy that once filled every room starts fading. One afternoon, he walks through the women's quarters unannounced, something he hasn't done in years. He sees you, stops, and for a moment, you recognize the man from that first conversation. Not the king, not the legend, just the person. He asks how you've been. You tell him, honestly. He nods, as though he already knew. Then he walks away. That's the last real conversation you ever have. Months later, Solomon dies. And at first, nothing happens. The palace continues operating. The servants continue working. The priests continue praying. For a few days, it almost feels impossible that the man who shaped your entire life is gone. Then the messengers arrive, one after another, dust-covered, breathless, panicked. There are revolts in the north, governors refusing orders, tribal leaders challenging the throne, old grudges resurfacing, political factions forming. The unity Solomon spent decades creating begins to crack. Then the crack widens. Then it shatters. Reports flood into Jerusalem. Every corridor buzzes with fear. Nobody knows what happens next. The priests blame the foreign shrines. The nobles blame taxes. The governors blame each other. Everyone has an explanation. Nobody has a solution. Then the news finally arrives. The kingdom is splitting. 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south. Everything Solomon built, everything David fought for, everything people believed would last forever, gone. Not because of a foreign invasion, not because of a military defeat, but because thousands of small decisions finally came due. Years ago, you thought the worst part of being Solomon's 700th wife would be loneliness. You were wrong. The worst part was having a front row seat to the collapse of something extraordinary and being powerless to stop it. You watched alliances become obligations. Obligations become resentments. Resentments become divisions. Divisions become history. You lived in the most spectacular palace in the ancient world. You were married to the wisest man who ever lived. You had wealth, security, servants, luxury, and every material comfort imaginable. And you spent your entire life as a number. 700. The last one counted, the first one forgotten. History remembers Solomon's wisdom, his temple, his proverbs, his songs. Nobody remembers your name, but you were there every quiet day of it. And the kingdom that fell apart after he was gone, part of that story was built on your silence too, whether anyone writes it down or not.